Gretchen and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over certain terms that seem to be misunderstood within the piercing community. Now, these terms are ones that are widely known, they're very common, but they sometimes get used interchangeably with other terms, or the definition of what that term is sometimes misunderstood. I have 5 groups of terms. So I have like the term that's often misunderstood paired with the term that most people are trying to get at, if that makes sense. So I'll be going over all of these terms just to give a better understanding, so that in case these are some terms that maybe you have a misunderstanding for or have been using them interchangeably, you can then know what each term means. And keep in mind, even if these terms are used interchangeably, even if they're not technically supposed to be used that way, everyone knows what you're talking about. But if you want to be like correct, these are the definitions for them. So I'm going to start with the grouping that I tend to hear more often used interchangeably or just really misunderstood. And that's gauges versus stretched, or even plugs. Something that I hear frequently is, oh, I gauged my ears to this size, or I want to gauge my ears. The correct thing you should be saying is, I stretched my ears, or I want to stretch my ears. We all know what you mean when you say you want to gauge your ears, but the correct term is to say that you're stretching your ears. So what do these terms all mean? Gauge. Gauge refers to the thickness. So this is, say, the thickness of your jewelry, or in the case of stretching your ears, it is the diameter that your ears are stretched to. So for me, my ears are stretched to 1/2 inch. Now, once you do get to a certain size, you no longer say gauge, you say inches. But say you're stretched to a 2 gauge. You're gonna say, I stretched my ears to a 2 gauge, or I want to stretch my ears to an 8 gauge. It's either referring to the thickness of the jewelry or the diameter of whatever that piercing is. So then when you hear the term stretch or stretching, it just refers to the act of, or the process of, stretching whatever piercing. Typically your lobes, but you can stretch any other piercing within reason. And then every so often I'll hear plugs thrown in there, like I want to plug my ears. That one's a little less common, but sometimes it gets tossed around interchangeably with gauges. And basically plugs are just a type of jewelry. So like right now I have in tunnels, but if they were solid, they would be plugs. So if you want to stretch your ears, just say, I'm hoping to stretch my ears to insert gauge here, instead of saying you're gauging your ears. Next up, we have keloids versus piercing bumps. The term keloid gets tossed around a little too often, when really, keloids are very rare. I can't even tell y'all how many DMs I have where people are like, can you tell me if I have a keloid? I promise you, it most likely is just a piercing bump. Piercing bumps are bumps that form quickly and typically go away after some tender love and care. It also doesn't seem to grow, whereas keloids take a little bit of time to form and can actually grow in size to be pretty substantial. They take way more time and effort to get rid of. They can become a serious problem, and oftentimes you're gonna have to see a doctor or a dermatologist to plan a course of action on how to get rid of them. And I think the issue here is just misunderstanding that a keloid is not as common as everyone seems to think or has been led to believe. Keloids are pretty rare. They usually don't form unless you've had a keloid in the past. Like, there are definitely people who are prone or susceptible to having keloids form, but most of us just deal with piercing bumps. And then also keep in mind, piercing bumps are, annoying, but they're not as serious as a keloid is. They can get kind of serious if you don't take care of them, but they're not to the same level as a keloid. Next up, we have the terms rejection and infection. A lot of people jump to the conclusion that their piercing is rejected when really it's just infected. Now, I shouldn't say just infected. We don't want our piercings to be infected at all, but a lot of people tend to jump past infection and go right to rejection. So tell them the difference. A rejection happens when your body sees the jewelry in your piercing as a foreign object, and it's like, whoa, that's not supposed to be here, get it out. So at that point, the body, because it thinks that that jewelry shouldn't be there, is going to push the jewelry out of your body, quite literally. There's some symptoms that you can look for, such as thinning skin around the jewelry, as well as the piercing hole looking kind of large, at least larger than it was when you got it done. An infection is when bacteria enters the piercing site and causes all sorts of mayhem. Symptoms to look for here are things like swelling, redness, hot to the touch, pain, pus, anything like that. So those symptoms are vastly different. Most of the time we're dealing with an infection, which also not fun to deal with, but rejection is, I don't want to say it's more serious than an infection, but it's more so the body is attacking the person and it's just like, whoa, you're not supposed to be here, get out, get gone, and is doing anything it can to make sure that jewelry vacates. Whereas with an infection, the body doesn't see the jewelry as a foreign object and is more so just like, oh, something's happened at the site, we need to take care of it. Next up, this grouping I don't see too often, but I have heard it in the past, and it's just jewelry versus piercing. And in this case, it's usually that people just use the terms interchangeably. We know what's meant, but it's just one of those things where you're talking fast and you're trying to relay what you're meaning and they get swapped. So just to clarify, jewelry is a piece that goes into a piercing site, and then a piercing is just that. There's a site there where a hole is created and jewelry goes in. So the act of creating a piercing is a piercing. I'm sure I'm gonna get comments on how I pronounce that. So that's like a quick little one that we may not think about too much, but there have been times where I have gone to get a piercing and someone else comes in and they're like, I'm looking to get an eyebrow piercing, or I'm looking to get a lip piercing. They're like, oh, okay, which one are you looking to get done? They're like, well, hold on, I'm just looking to change out my jewelry. So it's just one of those things where it's like, they get just swapped accidentally. So just making sure that we know the difference. And the final grouping is one that I actually used to confuse a little bit myself, and it is a type of piercing. And it took a little bit of research for me to realize the difference between the two. And that would be surface piercing versus dermal piercing. Like I said, I was one that used to use these interchangeably. I didn't realize that there was a difference between the two, but there is a pretty distinct one. Now they have a lot of similarities, but there is a pretty distinct difference. So a surface piercing is one that has 2 entry or exit points on the surface of the skin. For example, an eyebrow piercing or a belly button piercing. Both of those are considered surface piercings because you have to essentially pinch skin, you take the needle, and it goes through 2 entry points that are right there at the surface, which I think is pretty interesting. I didn't actually think that those were considered surface piercings for the longest time. Did all this research. They are. So surface piercings, the biggest distinction is that they have 2 entry points on the surface of the skin, whereas a dermal piercing only has 1 entry point on the surface of the skin and has an anchor underneath the skin. So even though both reside on the surface of the skin and can be placed a plethora of places all over the body, so the biggest distinction between the two is that a surface piercing has 2 entry points on the surface of the skin and a dermal piercing has 1 entry point on the surface of the skin. These terms are just ones that are either misunderstood or just get tossed around with other terms. They get used interchangeably. We know what people mean when they use the technical incorrect term, but if you want to know the actual correct term for what you're trying to say, here you go. These are the most common ones that I've come across, that a lot of people in the piercing community come across. And again, don't feel bad if you've been using them interchangeably or misunderstood what each term meant. It's fine. We know what you're saying. Let me know in the comments below if there are some other terms within the piercing community that you've picked up on before that tend to get used interchangeably or just seem to be a little bit more misunderstood. And then let me know the terms that people tend to swap them for. But that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to go down there and hit that subscribe button as well as that notification bell so YouTube will let you know when I upload next. But until next time, bye everyone.